Well, God bless the great state of New Hampshire.
I am particularly grateful, I have to say, to the people of New Hampshire.
So nice to come to New Hampshire. I can get to come in the front door of places. In New Jersey, I'm never allowed to come in the front door, you know?
Oh, we love New Hampshire.
The North Country of New Hampshire, a place that is so beautiful and so welcoming.
I do enjoy coming to New Hampshire because it seems to me like a lot of the people here are well informed.
I'm going to give you a few remarks and then we'll have a conversation. New Hampshire style.
First, it doesn't need much help.
Oh, everybody loves New Hampshire now that they're no longer in Iowa. Anyway, welcome back for more of this special edition, year-end edition, of course, of MTP Daily. We're drilling deep into the February foursome that will decide who gets the early momentum. You don't get momentum before Iowa, New Hampshire. Iowa, New Hampshire create the momentum in order to get the nomination, or so some of these folks hope. New Hampshire is set to have the first primary as required by state law. That is not a joke. They have made this part of their DNA, and just 1 week after the Iowa caucuses. On the Democratic side, the Clintons have always had nothing but love for the Granite State. It's where Bill was dubbed the comeback kid, even after technically losing the state in 1992. And, of course, it's where Hillary bounced back in 2008 with a win after losing Iowa and setting the stage for a very long nomination process on the Democratic side in 08. As for the Republicans, this will be the 6th time in 10 primaries that there is a Bush on the ballot. How about that? 6 of the last 10, dating all the way back to George H.W. Bush in 1980. Our panel is back for more, and joining us as our New Hampshire expert is Dante Scala, professor at the University of New Hampshire. Dante, good to see you. Author, by the way, of a new book, The Four Faces of the Republican Party, The Fight for the 2016 Nomination. Dante, the fact that you know who these four faces of the Republican Party are now tells me you may know already who's won this election, my friend.
One can hope.
Well, let's start with what matters to me the most, of what makes New Hampshire more unique than any other state, and that is the fact that this is the first test with independent voters, and they can totally change the face of the electorate. Who is the New Hampshire independent voter this year, and which primary are they going to be involved in?
Well, certainly you're seeing independent voters take a look at someone like Donald Trump, who is a populist candidate, who doesn't identify strongly with the Republican Party. And independent voters up here are of two camps. I mean, there are those voters who carefully think about which primary to go to, and then there are those independent voters who are really in it for the show. And they're going to be attracted to the candidate who's making the most news. And that could be the most news between, you know, February 1st when Iowa votes and New Hampshire voting most likely on February 9th. So a lot of the independent vote could depend on who comes out with some momentum out of Iowa. Right. You know, if Donald Trump doesn't perform well in Iowa, maybe he won't have the media blitz that he would if he were coming in as the clear front runner.
You know, it's interesting, and just to clarify things so people understand, if you're a registered Democrat, you cannot participate in the Republican primary. If you're a registered Republican, you cannot participate in the Democratic primary. But independents get to pick a ballot, and that's what makes it tricky. In 2000, just to give an example, some polls had Bill Bradley beating Al Gore, and then he ended up losing to Al Gore because a whole bunch of independents decided not to participate in the Democratic primary, went to the Republican primary, and McCain wins by 19. Okay, I wanted to get those caveats. I feel like the lawyer there. Get those caveats on the side. You know, Perry, I think what we don't know about New Hampshire is whether it is, does it end up doing its sort of this intellectual Republican quirkiness of the McCains, of the Christies, of that, or does it go with its more populist roots, the pitchfork primary type victories that a Pat Buchanan saw, right? It's like we don't know which Republican Party shows up.
I mean, at this stage of the race, Trump has been leading there by so much. I think the question to me is like not about who's in first, because he's really in first, but to speak in Dante's language a little bit in his book, he talks about this idea of moderate and liberal Republicans. 47% of the Republicans who voted in New Hampshire 2012 were consider themselves moderates or liberals. So my question is, who finishes in second? Is it Christie or is it Rubio? And I think it's a big problem for the Republican Party establishment if it's Christie ahead of Rubio. Then it becomes like, when is Rubio going to finish second in a state even?
You know, it's funny, Bob. I've had this theory, and I've said this to you before, Dante, that what happens in New Hampshire stays in New Hampshire. And I say it this way because the New Hampshire electorate, Republican electorate, will not be duplicated in any other state throughout the nominating process.
That's true.
It'll be the most liberal or moderate or however you want to describe it. It'll be the least conservative electorate we see. Correct?
The electorate doesn't map out anywhere else, but it's the most important state, I would argue, early on, because it has never been in recent elections this crowded in the mainstream lane. If you're an establishment Republican, Kasich, Rubio, Christie, Bush, they have been battling for months. There's no clear winner. I agree with Perry. It's going to be a battle for second place.
Well,
go ahead.
And it's been a long time since we have not had a local favorite in the mix, right? So we look back at the past, we say, well, Kerry was leading at that point, and Romney, even in 2008, 2012. Well, yes, on the Democratic side, we're going to get Sanders, but on the Republican side, there's no obvious local boy, and that's what makes it unique as well.
Dante, it feels like this establishment lane has changed a lot, right? You had Kasich popped, that was thanks to TV ads. Now the union leader got behind Christie, and Christie's been doing it the old-fashioned way. And I guess, Mike, this goes back to something we were talking about earlier. Donald Trump has not done New Hampshire the old-fashioned way. Chris Christie has. Does that matter?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think Chris Christie has built, I mean, you look at his favorable, unfavorables at the beginning of the year, and he was clearly underwater. And he's turned that around, and it hasn't been by massive rallies like Donald Trump, but it's been doing town hall meetings. I mean, Chris Christie is on page 3 or page 4 of the list of New Hampshire towns that a Republican candidate hits during a New Hampshire swing. I mean, he's a campaign manager's dream in that regard. So I think it's authentic, the momentum that we're seeing here. And I would put him and even Jeb Bush, I think, ahead of John Kasich right now in terms of trying to become that favorite of moderate establishment Republican voters.
You left out a name,
It's
Dante.
a real possibility.
You left out a name, and you're not the only one to do that, and that's Marco Rubio. What's going on?
Well, Rubio is right now a lot of potential because his net favorables have been strong all year. The question is whether he can cash in the deal over the next 2 months. Will he commit to New Hampshire the way that Chris Christie is, that Jeb Bush is? Those two are all in. Throw in John Kasich as well. And the fear is, I think, among establishment Republicans, is that Rubio, Christie, Kasich, Bush, throw in Fiorina, they're going to split 50% of the vote, let's say, 5 different ways, which makes for a muddle coming out of New Hampshire for an alternative to, say, a Donald Trump if he holds, which I'm not convinced of, but if he does, establishment's going to be looking for an alternative. Who do they pick?
And, Bob, by the way, Ted Cruz could win under that scenario. You know, 22, 23% could be a winning number. And he could get, if he was winning Iowa, there'll be enough.
No, it's Ted Cruz's secret in New Hampshire, the Ron Paul coalition.
Yeah, that is totally cratered.
It's totally cratered. Remember who came in second in New Hampshire last time? Ron Paul.
Yeah, let's quickly go to the Democratic side. Well, obviously, Bernie Sanders is favored to win. He should win, all those things. But how could he not win? How is it possible for him not to to not win?
To not win?
Yeah.
Well, some of it goes to who do the independents show up for, and where are they coming from, and where's that energy coming from? And depending on what the margin is in Iowa in terms of getting the younger voters out and getting all those people who are excited on Bernie mania, if they don't turn out and traditional Democratic voters turn out, women turn out, that helps Hillary Clinton.
Dante, very quickly, what's a scenario where Hillary Clinton does upset Bernie in New Hampshire?
Young voters and independents don't turn out for Bernie Sanders the way he hopes, although college campuses will be in session in February, which is something new for New Hampshire. But those are the 2 key groups. Will those low turnout groups turn out the same way that, say, 55-year-old Democratic women will turn out for Hillary Clinton?
We're looking at the fight for the first 4. It's Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. The February foursome will actually give us winners and losers, not just polls, in the quest for the Democratic and Republican presidential nominations. The outcomes will send some candidates soaring and will officially sink some others who are banking on an early breakthrough moment that perhaps will never come. All this hour, we're mapping out what you need to know to navigate the 2016 race. And with me here in Washington, our expert panel includes NBC News senior political reporter Perry Bacon Jr., national editor of the Cook Political Report, Amy Walter, and the Washington Post political reporter and MSNBC political analyst, Robert Costa. We'll also be joined by experts on the ground in each state. So, all eyes, where do we begin? Well, of course, it's Iowa, and we'll begin there. The Hawkeye State voters take their first-in-the-nation status very seriously, and the candidates take that as seriously as well.
We are all in the state of Iowa.
I'm always delighted to be here in Iowa.
Iowa's been amazing. It's been amazing. But we're doing so well, and I love this place.
Great to be back in Iowa. This is a great stadium. It smells like roses.
I know you Iowans take your responsibilities seriously.
There's one state that's really made a lot of progress, and that's Iowa.
It's great to campaign in Iowa, where every person matters.
I bet you Iowa didn't know they had that much love to give out. Joining me for this section of our special is Ann Selzer. She, of course, is the longtime pollster for the Des Moines Register and the person we count on to get the caucus polling correct. Ann, good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Well, let's begin with, I think, to me, the bigger question before we figure out the candidates, which is who's going to show up? And who's going to show up on each side, and what are these electorates going to look like? So you've been polling quite a bit through 2015. Is this going to be a big year for the caucuses like 2008, or more of a moderate year like 2012?
You know, we never know until the night exactly what's going to happen. We get a little bit of a hint in our final poll right before the caucus. But at this point in time, we wouldn't have predicted in 2008 that the number of people caucusing on the Democratic side was going to double. We just had no hint that that was going to happen. What we see in our data right now is that about 25%, 1 in 4, on each side, on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, say this will be their first caucus. So that's about what we've seen in years past. Whether that ends up being younger people, whether that ends up being more independent people, surely on the Republican side, when you had a field of 15, my initial thought, or 17 at one point, my initial thought was this is going to be a big turnout on the Republican side. We don't know yet if that will materialize.
Well, a few little facts that people should know. It's same-day voter registration. You show up. If you are not a registered voter, you can register, and let's say you're an independent, you want to participate in one of the two, you can do that on caucus night. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Ann, if you are going to turn 18 and be eligible to vote in November, then as a 17-year-old, you can caucus in February. Is that right?
That's right. It's part of the mix that makes the caucus on paper look like it would be impossible to poll accurately.
All right, let me bring in the rest of the panel. Well, there you go. But you do pull that off. You do pull that off. Amy, I think the thing that to me, the big question is going to be, is this going to be a traditional Iowa caucus on the Republican side? And if it is, advantage Ted Cruz. Or is Donald Trump going to remake this thing?
Well, and that's where I would love Ann to weigh in, too, because when you look at the latest poll that she put out there, you know, Cruz is doing well under all of these segments of the Republican electorate. And I do think if new voters come out, it's not as if these are new voters who'd be opposed to somebody like Ted Cruz. But I think you're exactly right. Look, the number one question in my mind throughout these first 4 states is who are Trump voters and do they show up?
All right, Ann, who are Trump voters and do they show up?
Well, Trump is taking second place with almost everybody, with almost every demographic group that is out there. He loses a little bit to Ben Carson when you look at evangelicals, but he's really in a solid second place. When he led our poll in August, people kept saying, who are the Trump voters? He led with every demographic. So he's not one of those candidates, and we can talk about Bernie Sanders maybe in a minute, who has sort of peaks and valleys when you look across the crosstabs. He really tends to be a very flat person. We're analyzing right now what we can find out more as we dig into our data files to get a better feel for whether Trump is in fact expanding the universe of people who can show up on caucus night.
You know, Perry, the other thing that it's amazing about Trump is he's not doing Iowa the way you're supposed to do Iowa, right? He doesn't go to pizza ranches, right, Bob? You haven't seen him there. He doesn't do these hand-to-hand campaigning, the retail campaigning. Ted Cruz has been doing that. He's been more traditional about it. But Trump hasn't done that. I wonder if Iowans are going to punish.
So far, he's done really well. Not just in Iowa, but New Hampshire, he's not run it that way either. He's done really well there. The key thing is the electorate in Iowa is so much more very conservative and so much more evangelical than the average state in the rest of the process. I'll be curious to see not only how does Cruz do among that part, but do Ben Carson, Huckabee, and Santorum, are they at basically zero? They're all like, Carson's been going much further down. The more he goes down, the more Cruz can go up. If he comes up a little bit more, that'll help. Other thing is Romney won 25% of the vote in 2012, basically tied that caucus. Trump's getting some of those people. I'd be curious to see who finishes second among the sort of traditional candidates, among the Rubio, Christie, Bush cases. That'll help them going forward if one of them gets 10, 15%.
But here's the other thing. When we talk about the field expanding and the universe expanding in 2008, Barack Obama had an intensive data organization as well. It's one thing to say, oh, I'm at a pizza ranch, or I have the guy who organized Santorum's win in 2012. He does not have, as far as we know, Donald Trump does not have a data-driven, targeted operation to find those people who've not turned out before.
Who does have the best organization? I mean, is it Cruz? Trump's organization is better than people think. That's always the line you hear, and frankly what I've seen. But it doesn't seem to be the way a winning caucus campaign would look like.
We'll have to see. It's different. I've sat down with Chuck Laudner, who ran Santorum's 2012 victorious caucus campaign, and I said, how do you define the Trump electorate in Iowa? He said, the people in a Walmart parking lot. You know, not necessarily people in churches, but it's the people who may have moved to Iowa, who are a little bit disengaged from politics. And that's where the Trump campaign has been soliciting caucus goers and trying to sign up people for the Trump campaign. And you also look who Trump has put as his national chairman. It's Sam Clovis from the western side of Iowa. Trump realizes he's not going to get the Cruz diehards, the people who are values voters. But if you're conservative populist, he thinks he could try to thread the needle.
Hey, and before we move to the Democrats in Iowa, who in this group could surprise you? We talk about Cruz and Trump. They're 1-2, and it feels like, you know, they're going to be 1-2. But the fact of the matter is, Rick Santorum was in single digits at this point in time. Mike Huckabee, he had started moving, but who in this, if they popped, it wouldn't surprise you?
Well, I think from the very beginning, when we first started polling, there was this little bit of upside for Marco Rubio beyond his showing just in the first place horse race. Keep in mind, you have a huge field of candidates. You only have 100 percentage points to go around. So we had to look beyond first choice to see who else had some depth. And it was always Marco Rubio who looked poised to do better than his first place horse race would suggest.
I am convinced if Marco Rubio wins Iowa, it's the one way this race ends in a hurry. Speaking of races that could end in a hurry, let's quickly delve into the Democratic side. To me, it's a one-state campaign for Hillary Clinton, Perry, in that if she loses Iowa, she could lose New Hampshire, and then suddenly the hand-wringing begins. She can shut this down quickly if she wins Iowa. What have you seen differently this time?
And my sense is if she wins this Iowa by 10 or points or something more than that, she could not only... Sanders is ahead of New Hampshire right now. If you get a big Clinton win, that might change the dynamics there as well. I think the difference is pretty simple. Bernie Sanders is not Barack Obama. When I'm there, there's just not the depth of support for him. And the war question, there's not a key issue Sanders has found yet in this campaign.
What have you seen? Anything that tells you that she could blow this?
You know, no. Early on in Iowa, I'm sure you talked to those same people. They were definitely hand-wringing. I heard a couple of people saying, oh, gosh, this feels like it felt like in early 2008. Those people are not wringing their hands anymore, at least when I'm talking to them. And a lot of it is her coalition, the coalition that she put together in 2007, is still there. It's just that there's not a stronger coalition on the other side. She hasn't expanded her coalition, but it's not like she's running against somebody who's expanded his.
All right, I want to give Ann the last word, but Bob, jump in here very quick.
Real quick, it's a sleepy race, and the Sanders campaign knows that, so that's why they're targeting college campuses, try to revive the base in the coming weeks.
And what evidence is in your poll that says Bernie can win? Not Bernie can get close, but Bernie can win.
Well, Bernie has the same demographic cocktail that Barack Obama put together, so he does very well, not only making up the gap to be even with Hillary Clinton, but to be many percentage points above her with people who are first-time caucus goers, people who are under the age of 45, people who are independent rather than democratic in their view, people who are liberal, and the people that I tend to call the nuns. When you ask about religious affiliation, they say none. And that obviously there's some overlap there, but it's a matter of getting the turnout to happen. And he has big events, bigger than hers typically. If he is getting pledge cards signed, if he's getting them organized to show up on February 1st, he could be a contender.
All right. Ann Selzer, always good to talk to you. Nobody figures this out better than you do, so don't mess it up for us, will you?